Welcome back to today's Explainer, where we're going to objectively unpack Dele Farotimi's pretty striking arguments about the deep-rooted issues within Nigeria's judicial and societal systems. Now, when we talk about justice systems, it's really easy to get bogged down in the tiny details of legal reform, rules, and daily regulations. But the source material we're looking at today takes a completely different, much more foundational approach. Farotimi, drawing on decades of experience as a lawyer, presents a diagnosis of a system that he argues isn't just dealing with a few flaws. Instead, he says it's experiencing a complete systemic collapse. We aren't just looking at a couple of bad actors here, we're talking about an entire structure that has entirely departed from the rule of law. He actually kicks off his diagnosis with this incredibly vivid metaphor. He argues that focusing solely on surface-level judicial reform while ignoring total societal collapse is, well, it's missing the real fatal disease entirely. It's a pretty powerful way to frame the conversation. Think about it like a building. If you look at the justice system as just one pillar of that building, it might seem like patching up that single pillar will save the whole structure. But he insists the judiciary is really just a reflection of everything else going on in the country: the educational system, the economy, the political landscape. So attempting to cure the ringworm of specific administrative issues while completely ignoring the leprosy of a collapsed state foundation is dangerously simplistic. So let's get right into the root of all this: impunity. You hear a lot of debates about whether a system is failing because the laws themselves are weak or because ethics are just bad. Farotimi bypasses both of those arguments. Using this brilliant analogy, he explains that the laws and codes of conduct are actually totally sufficient. The problem? They're resting on the crooked feet of a society that entirely disregards them. Imagine someone carrying a really heavy, awkward box. You might look at them and say, hey, your load is lopsided, but you're missing the fact that the person's legs are fundamentally crooked. Farotimi argues there are more than enough laws on the books right now to prevent these egregious abuses. The rules aren't the problem at all. The total disregard for them is. Now, this is a really crucial distinction he makes. He cleanly separates standard corruption from impunity. He defines impunity as a terrifying reality where the law doesn't even pretend to matter anymore. Look, corruption is when a system dictates a specific process and someone slips a little money under the table to speed that process up or bend a rule. But impunity, that's when people simply walk straight to the outcome they want without caring one bit about the process. It's a situation where raw power dictates the result, completely bypassing common sense, written law, the whole shebang. He argues this is what has truly deep-based the system. And that brings us directly to how this plays out in real life: the weaponization of the courts. How exactly does a culture of impunity impact everyday people? Well, he points to a stark disparity. The system is essentially paralyzed for the poor, but man, it moves at lightning speed to protect the powerful. According to his analysis, an everyday citizen seeking urgent judicial relief won't hear a single thing. They might wait 5, maybe even 10 years without their case ever seeing the light of day. But when the rich and mighty have even the most petty squabbles, injunctions are flying all over the place instantly. The courts, in this view, have evolved into a system that administers pure impunity for the untouchables, while barely offering a crumb of justice to the weak. He highlights a chilling example of this, where citizens protesting against literal hunger were hit with court injunctions and charged with treason. It really demonstrates how institutions can become complicit in suppression. Farotimi points out that when hungry citizens took to the streets to peacefully protest their living conditions, state actors rushed straight to the courts. The courts were then used to issue pronouncements and ultimately charge these everyday people with treason. He uses this specific instance to argue that the judiciary has become a tool to criminalize fundamental human rights, which just further deepens the public's loss of hope. To really wrap our heads around the sheer brazenness of this impunity, let's walk through a staggering real-world example: the 254-hectare land fraud. This legal maneuver perfectly illustrates a system being manipulated from a small, simple settlement all the way up to a massive fabricated land grab. It starts with an old 1993 case against the Lagos state government that was settled for a very specific, limited amount of land. But years later, this settlement was manipulated through the courts using a forged emphasis on a secondary judicial comment. That led to a completely new, vastly inflated court order that had absolutely no basis in the original judgment. Let's put this into perspective. 10. That is the exact, final amount of hectares the Supreme Court originally and legally awarded the family in the settlement. It was a clear, fully documented, final settlement with the state. The legal doctrine of estoppel should have meant the door was closed. No further claims could be made. Now hold that number in your head and contrast it with 254. That is the staggering amount fraudulently claimed when an administrative judge suddenly issued a vastly inflated writ of possession. Fair to You details how someone basically fraudulently underlined a passing comment in a concurring judgment about unextinguished equitable interest. Without even filing the proper enrolled order of the Supreme Court, this underlying comment was taken to an administrative judge in Lagos, who then inexplicably issued a writ for 254 hectares. And according to his account, when this fraud was finally challenged, the system didn't correct itself, it doubled down. When Forotimi and his clients resisted this enforcement and successfully got the fraudulent order quashed, the original beneficiaries ran right back to the Supreme Court. Forotimi argues the court then acted without any official survey, basically multiplying and dividing land limits, violating their own rules, to claim that this massive, hundreds of hectares discrepancy was, wait for it, just a clerical error. I mean, it's a prime example of impunity, walking directly to the desired answer, completely ignoring the legal reality. So, if the institutions are failing this profoundly, who steps in to demand better? That brings us to the missing elite class. When challenged on whether the elites can fix this mess, Farotimi outright rejects the premise. He vehemently argues that Nigeria actually has no elite class at all. Instead, he lists these specific attributes to describe a wealthy demographic obsessed purely with extraction and escape. He describes them as myopic, consumed only by the mindless pursuit of money and showing it off. Their ultimate goal isn't to build a sustainable, functioning society. No, it's to buy homes abroad, secure second passports, and guarantee an escape route from the very country they are actively ruining. The crucial takeaway here is the vast difference between simply having a lot of money and acting as a true elite class that takes responsibility for the survival of the nation. It's a fascinating concept for any society, really. A true elite class demands better standards from their institutions because they recognize that the rule of law is the only thing that protects their own long-term interests. Because, frankly, you never know when you'll be out of power. But his assessment is that the current wealthy class is just too busy extracting resources to care about building a society that even their own children can safely live in. All right, so where does all this lead? Let's talk about planning for the day after. Farotimi doesn't just leave us with a grim diagnosis. He actually reframes a word